In a time when the world seems to be on fire, you need those friends and allies. And Canada is that country that has always been our partner. Looking back onto trade, I'm sure we just need to deepen that. We've listened to Prime Minister Carney in terms of really looking at Europe as our partner. It's very much mutual.
Since the start of his second term, President Trump has unleashed a wave of tariffs that many partners describe as a tariff tantrum. Duties ranging from 10 to 50% have unsettled global trade, and even close allies have not been spared. Canada has responded by tightening its ties with Europe, not only in trade, but also in defense. Ottawa is exploring a submarine program with Germany, highlighting that even close U.S. allies are willing to turn to Europe for major procurement projects. And Canada is not alone. Other trade partners, from India to Switzerland, have shown similar signs of looking beyond Washington, turning toward European suppliers as a way to answer Trump's tariffs. These moves are not routine adjustments in defense planning. They are seen as political responses to Trump's tariff policy, reminders that allies and partners can use defense procurement as a form of pushback. Starting with Canada. The 88 F-35 fighter jets ordered in January 2023 remain on track, with deliveries set to begin in 2026. For reasons tied to NORAD and NATO integration, Ottawa has little room to reverse course. By exploring German submarines for the Victoria-class replacement, Canada is showing that not every major contract will automatically fall to Washington, a reminder that tariffs carry political consequences even in the defense sphere. India offers another clear example. Only weeks before the tariff hike, New Delhi had signed a $4 billion agreement for 31 MQ-9B drones from the United States. Once Washington lifted tariffs on Indian exports to 50%, talks for more American P-8I aircraft were paused. Instead, India is moving ahead with new French Rafales and keeping deliveries of Russian S-400 systems on track. Halting a U.S. deal was a direct way to show displeasure without breaking existing contracts. Brazil has followed a similar path. Faced with a 50% tariff, Brasilia is leaning harder on Sweden's Gripen fighter program and slowing new contracts with American defense firms. This recalibration is widely viewed as a symbolic response, a signal that Brazil will not simply absorb the tariff shock without answering in kind. Spain made its position crystal clear. In August 2025, Madrid announced that the F-35 would not be part of its future air fleet. Instead, the government doubled down on the Eurofighter and pledged heavier investment in the European FCAS project alongside France and Germany. The choice underscored a political stance shaped by ongoing disputes with Washington. And then there is Switzerland. The country's 36 F-35s remain on order, but debate has intensified since Trump's tariff announcement. Parliament and the press are questioning whether scaling back would be an appropriate way to push back. Even a traditionally neutral country is now weighing its defense deals as a tool of political messaging.
Taken together, these cases form a pattern. No country has severed ties with the United States, but each has used defense procurement as a way to answer Trump's tariffs. For Canada, diversifying into Europe while keeping the F-35 deal intact sends a dual message. For India, halting P-8I talks was a calculated pause. For Switzerland, the debate itself is a form of protest. Brazil and Spain are steering toward European suppliers, linking defense choices with wider frustration over tariffs. Defense contracts, once treated as untouchable pillars of alliance, are now part of the response playbook. Trump's tariffs have not only unsettled global trade, they have turned weapons purchases into instruments of political retaliation.
Well, let's talk about this extended truce between China and the U.S. that was announced by President Trump.
I think that President Trump didn't have much of a choice because China is in a very strong position to negotiate.
If China is operating from a power position, what about Canada?
In early August, two very different trade stories unfolded. In Washington, President Donald Trump announced a 90-day extension of the U.S.-China tariff truce. The White House framed it as a way to buy time and secure new commitments on U.S. chip exports and energy sales to China. Beijing, for its part, still controls most of the world's rare earth production and had just opened new zero-tariff access to dozens of African nations, strengthening its own negotiating position. But while Trump eased tensions with Beijing, the pressure on Canada stayed intact. Since August 1st, Canadian goods that don't qualify under USMCA rules have faced a 35% US tariff, a rate raised from 25% in late July. There's no sign yet of a reduction, and Ottawa has received none of the temporary tariff delays that Mexico secured. The contrast is clear. One neighbor gets more time, the other gets more heat. For Trump, tariffs are more than an economic measure. They're a negotiating lever. The official justifications change frequently. Border security, fentanyl, dairy, even unrelated sectors like banking. With China, the 90-day truce was tied to specific exchanges. More US chips from companies like Nvidia, more American ethane for Chinese industry, and the understanding that Beijing's dominance in critical minerals gives it leverage. With Canada, the calculus is different. Keeping tariffs high maintains pressure ahead of a possible early USMCA reopening. It limits Ottawa's breathing space and forces Canadian negotiators to consider concessions to avoid further escalation. Trump's track record with other partners, from the EU's capped 15% rates to Switzerland's 39%, shows how he uses these numbers to anchor hard bargaining.
We are in a difficult position with the U.S. We're subject now to a tariff of 35%. We have to put in place a very elaborate plan to diversify our exports.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has avoided rushing into retaliatory moves, opting for a mix of steady dialogue and visible domestic reinforcement. In July, Ottawa announced over $1 billion Canadian in measures to protect the steel sector, including procurement rules favoring Canadian steel and aluminum, funding to reskill affected workers, and infrastructure investments to stabilize supply. These supports aim to absorb some of the market shock from the U.S. tariffs, which since June 4th have been as high as 50% on U.S. imports of Canadian steel and aluminum. According to the Canadian Steel Producers Association, about 6 to 6.5 million tons of steel lost access to the U.S. market after those measures. The domestic plan opens a 2 to 2.5 million ton opportunity for Canadian producers, a first step in restructuring away from over-reliance on U.S. buyers.
Europe is an obvious partner. It has a very mature economy. They're interested in all kinds of goods that we can export.
But we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the US one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
At the same time, Canada is deepening ties with the European Union. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, most goods already trade tariff-free, but new talks are focusing on aligning industrial strategy in sectors like steel, aluminum, and critical minerals. With a market of roughly 450 million people and stable regulatory rules, the EU offers a reliable alternative that reduces Canada's exposure to US tariff swings. Trump's strategy is built on speed. Apply tariffs, create immediate discomfort, and extract concessions quickly. Carney's counter is built on endurance. Reinforce domestic industries, diversify export markets, and keep diplomatic channels open until the balance shifts. While over 85% of Canada's exports to the U.S. still move tariff-free under USMCA rules, Ottawa holds cards that are hard for Washington to replace: strategic minerals, integrated auto supply chains, and substantial oil and gas flows. By protecting these advantages and expanding reliable partnerships like the EU, Canada aims to make sure it can withstand U.S. tariff pressure longer than Trump expects. The fight isn't just over rates and exemptions. It's about shaping the trade rules that will define North America for the next decade. And on that front, Canada is determined not to play from behind.
35% tariff is now in place on some Canadian goods. And one Canadian industry that Washington has taken particular issue with is dairy.
In early August 2025, President Donald Trump took another step in his aggressive trade strategy. He raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, escalating tensions at the border. Although the dairy sector itself is not directly hit by these new tariffs, Canada's dairy supply management system has long been a thorn in Trump's side. For years, he has portrayed it as an unfair barrier that protects Canadian farmers while limiting U.S. access to the market. Now, with broader tariffs in place and trade talks under strain, the question is whether Trump can force change in a policy Canada has vowed to defend at all costs.
Supply management is designed to protect dairy farms. There are limits to how much Canadian dairy farms can produce and how much from the United States can be imported to Canada.
Canada's supply management controls how much dairy is produced domestically and how much foreign product can enter the market. Imports from the U.S. are capped at roughly 3.5% of Canada's dairy market. If that limit is exceeded, tariffs skyrocket, 241% on milk and nearly 298.5% on butter, according to the Canadian Border Services Agency. The system has been in place for over 6 decades, designed to keep prices stable and protect thousands of family-run farms from being outcompeted by massive U.S. operations that can house tens of thousands of cows.
The dairy industry falls under CUSMA regulations, but U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly complained, saying it's an unfair deal for his country's producers.
From Washington's perspective, this is the very definition of a trade barrier. American producers already send about $800 million worth of dairy products to Canada annually, while Canada exports roughly $300 million in dairy south of the border. To Trump and his allies, the limits, and the high tariffs beyond them, mean lost opportunities for U.S. farmers. Just weeks before these latest tariff increases, Canada's parliament passed legislation that forbids using supply management as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations. The bill enjoyed cross-party support, with advocates pointing to past trade deals where portions of the market were conceded despite political promises to protect it. Now, any government that wants to change the system would have to repeal the law and pay a steep political price. This protection isn't just about Quebec, the heartland of Canadian dairy. Farmers in British Columbia, Alberta, and even the Northwest Territories see supply management as essential for economic stability. It's a rare national consensus in an often divided political landscape. Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, know what's at stake. Loosening supply management too far could allow foreign dairy to take up to 18% of the domestic market, a level that industry groups warn would undermine the system entirely. That could mean farm closures, job losses, and declining rural economies. Beyond defending dairy, Canada has leverage of its own. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian energy, critical minerals, and integrated auto supply chains. These sectors give Ottawa bargaining power that extends far beyond milk and butter. In trade talks, it's not just about defending one industry. It's about maintaining a balanced, mutually beneficial agreement. Trump may have expected the same playbook to work here as it has elsewhere: apply tariffs, demand changes, and secure a quick win. Instead, Canada's legal safeguards and political unity have slowed the process to a crawl. The dairy sector remains protected, with Ottawa signaling it is ready to walk away from a bad deal rather than concede on supply management. Meanwhile, U.S. dairy producers still face oversupply, volatile prices, and stiff competition abroad. Higher tariffs on other Canadian goods risk hurting American importers more than they help U.S. farmers, a reminder that not every bluff works in Washington's favor.
Setting a tariff for essentially the rest of the world, and that's what they're going to pay if they want to do business in the United States.
What happened to 90 trade deals in 90 days?
We've spoken to everybody. We know it's all done.
I think with Vietnam, the UK, with China, not all those are intended to be final deals either.
At the start of August, President Donald Trump declared victory. His global tariff campaign forced allies into quick agreements before his deadline. The promise was stability, with tariff caps around 15% in exchange for huge investment pledges in the United States. On paper, it looked like a win. In practice, details remain vague, and industries in partner countries still feel the strain. Washington's message is simple: invest big or face higher tariffs. That has left allies from Europe to Asia weighing short-term relief against the burden of massive commitments and the risk that Trump could change course again. Japan's auto sector shows the limits of these deals. The World Trade Organization reported that the average U.S. tariff rate now exceeds 20%, the highest in more than a century. For Japanese car makers, this is a real cost.
Short term, we have to brace for the impact. We'll work hard to find a way to overcome these incremental costs.
Mazda expects almost $1 billion in extra expenses this year. To cope, it is ramping up output at a $2 billion plant in Alabama, built during Trump's first term. That investment softens the blow, but half of Mazda's cars are still produced in Japan for the U.S. market. The company also relies heavily on a large factory in Mexico, which remains exposed until Washington finalizes terms with Mexico. The result is uncertainty, not stability. Europe's metal sector is in a similar bind.
Negotiations, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the framework trade agreement with the US will provide support for Europe's metal sector freight, but details remain in short supply.
Brussels reached a framework agreement with Washington, promising tariff cuts and a quota system. Yet steel and aluminum still face a punishing 50% duty. The quota system, which should allow some duty-free exports, is not yet defined. The European Steel Association says U.S. tariffs have already damaged an industry worth more than $90 billion a year and weakened by falling demand. Business leaders warn they remain in the dark with little more than promises to rely on. These examples show that rushing to sign has not removed the pressure.
Canada took another route. Ottawa refused to sign under pressure, accepting a 35% tariff on goods outside CUSMA as of August 1st. That sounds severe, but CUSMA continues to exempt the vast majority of Canadian trade. According to Scotiabank chief economist Jean-François Perrault, between 85 and 95% of exports remain tariff-free under the deal, when averaged, Canada's effective tariff rate is about 5 to 6%. That is painful, but still lower than the 15% rate faced by Europe, Japan, or South Korea. Although Canada has felt the pain of Trump's tariffs, the country is turning its focus inward. Rather than tying its future to Washington's demands, it is strengthening itself at home.
We've got a lot of work to do on major projects, on affordability, on security in our communities.
This was clear in the recent meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford in Ottawa, where leaders emphasized building national competitiveness and resilience. Some Canadians question whether the government is being too passive in the face of Trump's tariffs, but the data suggests that Canada has avoided the most punishing outcomes while keeping leverage for future talks. Unlike partners that promised hundreds of billions in investments, Canada has not mortgaged its long-term position for short-term relief.
What the Prime Minister actually said during the election campaign. No deal is better than a bad deal. And so we're not going to be in a hurry to sign a bad deal.
The contrast is clear. Nations that rushed to sign before August 1st now face heavy investment costs and lingering uncertainty. Japan's car makers and Europe's steel industry show that the pain did not disappear after the agreements. Canada, by holding firm, absorbed targeted damage in specific industries, but kept the broader economy intact and its negotiating position alive. This is not surrender. It is a strategy of endurance. With energy exports, critical minerals, and an integrated supply chain, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. Trump may continue to escalate, but Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach shows that strategic patience is the strongest counterweight to Washington's unpredictable demands.
Canada and the United States have reestablished free trade for the vast majority of our goods.
A gesture in the hopes it will reset the relationship with the U.S.
After months of tariffs and tense exchanges, the tone between Washington and Ottawa has shifted. Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced that Canada will remove many of its counter tariffs on American goods. He presented this not as a concession, but as a reset. Carney said Canada is aligning with the United States to preserve what he calls the best trade deal any country currently has with America. President Trump welcomed the move and said new negotiations would begin soon. For both leaders, this moment marks the reopening of talks that will shape the next phase of North American trade.
Starting September 1st, Canada will scrap the 25% counter tariffs it placed on American goods covered by the North American Free Trade Deal.
Donald Trump has relied on tariffs as his main negotiating tool. Since August 1st, Canadian goods outside of CUSMA have faced a 35% duty. On top of that, U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum remain at 50%, raising costs for North American manufacturers. For integrated supply chains, this has disrupted the just-in-time model that once defined cross-border trade. This strategy mirrors what Trump has done with Europe, which accepted a 15% baseline tariff in exchange for stability. The same logic applied to Japan and South Korea with sectoral agreements. Canada, however, already holds a unique position. Roughly 85 to 90% of Canadian exports to the U.S. remain tariff-free under CUSMA, leaving the effective tariff rate at about 5.5%. By comparison, the global average tariff into the U.S. has jumped to nearly 16%, according to government data released earlier this month. Trump points to these figures as evidence that his pressure tactics are working.
We're matching what the United States has done, what the president has done. We have the best deal of any country with the United States right now.
Our hope is that we can come to a bilateral arrangement which takes some pressure off the sectoral tariffs.
Mark Carney has pushed back against claims that lifting counter tariffs is surrender. He argues Canada is protecting strategic sectors while ensuring Canadian goods keep their unique advantage in the U.S. market. By removing retaliatory duties, he signals that Canada respects the current agreement and is positioning itself for the next phase of talks. His priority is stability. Canadian businesses want long-term certainty before making new investments, and that stability depends on clear rules. With the U.S. Carney's approach is to demonstrate that Canada can maintain its access to the American market while also exploring diversification abroad. His upcoming trip to Germany with key ministers highlights this push. Rather than backing down, Carney is choosing to secure leverage and keep Canada's position intact as negotiations intensify.
Our negotiations with the United States have been taking place as the U.S. has been in the process of fundamentally transforming all of its trading relationships.
The toughest work still lies ahead. Renegotiation of CUSMA could take up to 18 months, and both governments know the stakes are enormous. Daily trade between the two countries is worth an estimated $2.5 to $3 billion US, a figure that underscores why neither side can afford prolonged disruption. Trump wants to prove that his tariff strategy can reset terms in America's favor. Carney wants to show that Canada can protect its privileged access without conceding vital industries. The unresolved disputes over metals and autos remain serious obstacles. Integrated supply chains, especially in autos, continue to face pressure. Yet Canada enters this stage with a strong advantage. It still enjoys the lowest average tariff rate of any U.S. trading partner. For Americans, the partnership secures energy, auto parts, and agricultural inputs that cannot easily be replaced. For Canadians, the United States is still the dominant market. The coming months will test endurance more than rhetoric. Trump's pressure and Carney's patience are now on a collision course. The question is not whether one side will fold, but whether both can find a balance that secures North America's economic future.